Welcome, everyone. We're diving deep today
Deep.
into a whole bunch of ideas that you, the listeners, actually shared with us.
Yeah, it's really cool, actually,
It all comes from a book called The Great Mental Models.
by Shane Parrish.
Right. And we're going to try to kind of give you the most powerful tools for thinking that we possibly can in this deep dive.
Exactly. You've sent us like this amazing collection of just really interconnected concepts, and we're going to look at sort of the fundamental ways that that these models can change the way you think.
Yeah, and learn new things. And we want to do it without making you feel overwhelmed.
Yeah, like you're drowning in information. It's like a shortcut to deeper understanding, maybe.
Okay, so let's jump right in. The first idea we're going to unpack is that the mental picture we have of the world,
Our maps.
right, our maps, are not the world itself.
The territory.
Right. Then we're going to look at the importance of knowing where your knowledge is strong and where it's limited.
That's your circle of competence.
Your circle of competence.
Right.
And then we're going to get to the nitty-gritty of first principles thinking,
Ooh, yeah.
how to break things down to their core.
And then we'll move to thought experiments, right? To explore different scenarios and uncover those hidden assumptions we might not even realize we have.
Right. And we're also going to look at something that people don't think about very often, the second-order effects.
And then what?
Right. And then what? We'll talk about probabilities.
Because the future is rarely certain.
Right. The future is rarely certain. We're also going to look at the critical difference between correlation,
When things just happen to occur together
right,
versus when one thing actually causes another.
causation.
Exactly.
Okay. We'll also talk about regression to the mean. That's statistical phenomenon. Then we'll flip things around and use a problem-solving technique called inversion.
Ooh, I like that one.
Finally, we'll look at the principles of Occam's razor, which favors simpler explanations.
Right, and its companion, Hamlin's razor, which basically says, don't assume bad intentions.
Right. So these aren't just abstract ideas. These are tools that, when you use them, can really boost your ability to learn effectively and understand complex situations.
Totally. It's about seeing those underlying structures, the connections that might otherwise remain invisible.
So the first big idea is that the map is not the territory.
What's so crucial to get here is that our mental models, those ways we represent the world in our minds, are inherently simplified versions of reality. They are not the full, rich, often messy, actual reality itself. W.G. Box put it best, I think. He said, remember that all models are wrong. The practical question is, how wrong do they have to be to not be useful?
That quote is perfect because it reminds us that even the most sophisticated understandings are still just approximations,
Maps.
maps.
Exactly.
And, this idea comes up very clearly in the early days of Amazon.
Oh, interesting.
Jeff Bezos noticed that their data,
Their map.
their map, indicated that customer call wait times were perfectly acceptable. But customers were complaining.
The territory.
Territory was speaking
Yeah.
loudly about these long wait times. And this is where Bezos famously said, when the data and the anecdotes disagree, the anecdotes are usually right.
He didn't blindly trust the data, right?
Right.
He understood that the real-world territory, the actual customer experience, was telling a different story.
So you have to constantly check your mental models against reality.
Absolutely.
And just like reality evolves, our models need to evolve too. So think about how our understanding of physics has changed over time. For centuries, Newtonian physics was this remarkably useful model for understanding the movement of objects, from apples falling from trees to the orbits of planets.
Right, but it wasn't the whole picture. Newtonian physics is incredibly useful for a vast range of everyday applications. But then along comes Einstein's theory of relativity, offering a more comprehensive and accurate map of the universe, especially when you're dealing with really high speeds or strong gravitational fields.
Right. So is Newtonian physics wrong?
Not really. It's still incredibly useful for a vast range of everyday applications. It's just not the whole story. It's like using a map of a city to navigate. It'll get you where you need to go most of the time. But if you're trying to understand the geology of the area, you need a different kind of map, one that shows the underlying rock formations and fault lines.
And when physicists encounter completely new territory, like the quantum realm, they don't assume their existing maps will automatically apply.
Exactly. And it's important to remember that our maps aren't objective. They're shaped by our own perspectives, our values, and even the limitations of our own understanding. Think about how the act of drawing a map can influence how we see the territory.
Right, like national borders.
Yes, exactly. National borders on a world map. powerfully shape how we understand different societies, even though the concept of a nation-state, as historian Margaret McMillan has pointed out, is a relatively recent development that kind of grew alongside the creation and widespread use of maps.
It's like, look at the borders of Syria, Jordan, and Iraq.
Right, they were largely drawn based on Western strategic interests after World War I, not on pre-existing cultural or tribal boundaries.
Right, so these maps reflected a specific geopolitical map in the minds of their creators.
As much as they depicted the actual land.
Right, and that brings us to Jane Jacobs. In her book, The Death and Life of Great American Cities, she talks about how city planners, guided by these abstract models of urban design,
Through maps.
tried to impose these maps on existing urban environments.
Without truly understanding how those cities functioned organically, at street level.
Yeah, like they prioritized their theoretical model,
Over the reality of how people lived.
and it often led to unintended consequences.
As she put it, it became possible also to map out master plans for the statistical city. And people take these more seriously, for we are all accustomed to believe that maps and reality are not necessarily related, or that if they are not, we can make them so by altering reality.
Right, so we can't just impose our simplified models onto the world and expect reality to conform. Ultimately, mistaking our maps for the territory can lead to big errors in judgment.
Totally. Someone might have an impressive resume, a seemingly perfect map of qualifications and experience, but that doesn't automatically mean they can do the job. We need to be willing to engage with the complex and ever-changing reality.
Okay, so we've established that maps are not the territory. Now let's move on to another crucial concept, understanding your circle of competence.
I like this one. It's about identifying the areas where your knowledge, skills, and experience give you a real advantage.
Right, your circle of competence.
But just as important is having a clear understanding of the boundaries of that circle, where your expertise kind of fades and your knowledge becomes less reliable.
And operating within your circle gives you an edge. You have a deep understanding of the nuances, you can often anticipate potential problems, you're better equipped to make informed decisions.
Right. But step outside that perimeter and your advantage quickly disappears.
You're playing a game where the other people understand the rules better than you.
Think of it like a stranger in a new town versus someone who's a lifer. The stranger might quickly grasp some of the superficial aspects of the town.
You're looking at a tourist map.
Exactly, making assumptions based on limited observations. But the lifer, with their deep ingrained knowledge of the town's history, its social dynamics, its hidden quirks, understands those underlying complexities and the potential pitfalls that the stranger might completely miss.
And building that lifer level of understanding, that solid circle of competence, takes time. It requires years of dedicated learning, hands-on experience, and learning from mistakes.
Yeah, as Alexander Pope said, a little learning is a dangerous thing. Drink deep, or taste not the Pierian spring. A superficial understanding can lead to overconfidence. That belief that you know more than you do. Deeper immersion reveals the true complexity, leading to a more realistic assessment of your capabilities.
And it's not static, this circle of competence. It requires continuous effort to maintain and update as the world changes. New knowledge emerges.
Totally. It's why even top experts in their fields seek outside perspectives, like Atul Gawande, the surgeon. He hired a coaching surgeon to observe him and provide feedback. It takes a certain humility to expose yourself to that. But Gawande understood that he had blind spots he couldn't see, and that an external expert perspective was essential for continued improvement.
So what do you do when you find yourself outside your circle of competence?
Okay, well first, make a conscious effort to learn the fundamental principles of that new area. But always remember, you are a stranger, not a lifer, right? Be wary of that initial surge of easily acquired information. That can sometimes create a false sense of mastery.
Right. Second, engage with real experts. And don't just ask for quick answers. Delve into the why behind their thinking. Understand the variables they consider, the assumptions they make, the principles that guide their decisions. And always consider the cartographer, right? Like we said with maps. What are the experts' biases? Their incentives? Could their advice be subtly influenced by their own interests?
Yeah, and finally, leverage your understanding of basic mental models, the kind we're exploring in this episode. They can act as a framework to augment your limited knowledge in an unfamiliar field.
Queen Elizabeth I is a good example here. She understood the importance of operating with a clear awareness of her own circle of competence. She didn't possess deep expertise in all matters of governance, so she strategically built her Privy Council.
With people with diverse areas of knowledge, fostering open debate, and drawing upon the collective wisdom of those with different circles of competence. And that was a big factor in England's stability and prosperity during her reign.
And similarly, Rose Blumkin, the remarkable founder of Nebraska Furniture Mart. Yeah, Mrs. B built a massively successful business by focusing intensely on her core areas of competence, understanding numbers.
And the home furnishings market.
Right. Warren Buffett famously noted that Mrs. B had an incredible grasp of cash flow, furniture, and real estate, but had absolutely no interest or involvement in areas outside that, like the stock market.
She knew her lane.
So, truly, knowing your circle of competence and respecting its boundaries is fundamental to making good decisions.
Absolutely.
Okay, now let's explore the power of first principles thinking.
This one's fun.
It is fun.
So, first principles thinking, what's powerful about it is it gives you a way to break down problems by stripping away assumptions and identifying what you know to be fundamentally true. It's about getting down to the bedrock, the irreducible elements. Richard Feynman, he had this great way of putting it. He said, I don't know what's the matter with people. They don't learn by understanding. They learn by some other way, by rote or something. Their knowledge is so fragile.
That's a great quote. It's about building your understanding on a solid foundation, not on layers of just accepted beliefs.
Or analogies?
Think of it like building with Legos.
Okay, I like Legos.
If you're trying to modify an already assembled Lego house, you're limited to making these small changes, right?
Right. You're stuck with the basic structure.
You're accepting the existing structure
Yeah.
and trying to tweak it.
But what if you disassemble that Lego house down to its individual bricks?
Right, you can build something completely different.
Suddenly a whole new world of possibilities.
And everything around us can be viewed as a combination of these fundamental Lego blocks.
Right, assembled in a particular way.
First principles thinking gives us the ability to take them apart and reassemble them.
It's like reverse engineering.
Right, in new and better ways.
It's about going beyond those surface level tactics and getting to the core, those foundational principles. Like if you're trying to improve the energy efficiency of a refrigerator, the laws of thermodynamics are your first principles, the fundamental constraints you have to work within.
But a theoretical physicist might go even deeper.
Right. Exploring the underlying principles of entropy.
Okay, so how do we figure out what these first principles are?
Well, there's the Socratic method,
Asking
a
questions.
series of probing questions. Not just to get answers, but to clarify your thinking. Challenge assumptions. Look for evidence. Consider alternative perspectives. Examine consequences. Even question the initial question itself.
And then there's the 5 whys. It's a technique.
It's deceptively simple, like a kid asking why over and over again.
Right. But you're trying to get to the root cause of a problem.
You delve deeper into a statement or belief until you hit a falsifiable fact.
Something that can be tested.
Right. If you end up with explanations like, because I said so, or it's just always been that way, you've probably hit an assumption, not a first principle.
Right. And a great example of first principles thinking in action is the discovery that the bacterium Helicobacter pylori, not stress, causes most stomach ulcers.
For years, everyone just assumed bacteria couldn't survive in the stomach.
The sterile stomach.
Right. And this prevented researchers from even looking for a bacterial cause.
But then Dr. Robin Warren observed bacteria.
In stomach tissue samples.
Right.
Challenging that assumption.
Yeah.
He teamed up with Dr. Barry Marshall, who actually ingested the bacteria.
To prove the connection.
And they ended up winning a Nobel Prize.
For revolutionizing the treatment of ulcers with antibiotics.
They asked those fundamental questions. They challenged the assumptions. They looked for evidence.
It's amazing how ingrained and unchallenged assumptions can really hinder progress.
Absolutely. First principles thinking helps us move beyond incremental improvements based on existing practices and see new possibilities.
Temple Grandin's work with livestock is another good example of this. She designed those curved chutes for cattle, not because curved chutes were inherently better, but because she understood animal behavior, and she knew minimizing animal stress was key for efficient and humane handling.
Right. So the curved chute wasn't the principle itself. It was a tactic based on the deeper principle of reducing stress.
Right. So first principles thinking equips us with the understanding to develop better methods.
Rather than blindly following existing ones.
Right. As Harrington Emerson said, as to methods, there may be a million and then some, but principles are few.
The man who grasps principles can successfully select his own methods. The man who tries methods, ignoring principles, is sure to have trouble.
Okay, Now let's talk about thought experiments.
Ooh, I love these. It's where you imagine the possibilities,
You explore different scenarios and test ideas in your mind,
often in situations that would be impossible or unethical to do in the real world.
but they require rigor, right?
Definitely.
Yeah,
Similar to scientific experiments.
right.
You define the question, you do background research, you formulate a hypothesis, you run the experiment in your mind, you analyze the outcomes, you draw conclusions, and then you adjust your understanding.
So Warren Buffett's ovarian lottery is a really powerful example. He asks you to imagine designing the rules of society before you're born without knowing your circumstances.
It highlights the role of luck in life.
Right. And then think about this. Imagine a basketball game between LeBron James and Woody Allen.
Pretty predictable outcome, right?
Right. Now imagine LeBron James versus Kevin Durant.
Much more complex.
The range of possible outcomes is much greater.
So, the value of thought experiments is they allow us to explore from different angles to push the boundaries of what's possible.
Right.
Like Einstein's elevator thought experiment, exploring the equivalence of acceleration and gravity, which led to his general theory of relativity.
Right. And they're also useful for reimagining history.
Historical counterfactuals, what if question.
What if Y happened instead of X? Or would the outcome have been the same if Y had happened? But it's important to be cautious here because history is so complex.
A small change can have huge, unpredictable consequences.
Right, so you can use these thought experiments to explore unrealized possibilities, but they don't give you definitive answers.
Exactly.
So for example, what if Gavrilo Princip hadn't assassinated Archduke Franz Ferdinand?
It doesn't rewrite history,
Yeah.
but it can give us a deeper appreciation for the factors that led to World War I,
And then there are thought experiments like John Rawls' Veil of Ignorance.
where you design a just society without knowing your place in it.
Right. It forces you to think about fairness from a more impartial perspective. And this can be applied to so many situations, from company policies to ethical dilemmas.
And ultimately, they can help us make better decisions. By simulating various scenarios, we understand the potential risks and rewards.
Okay, now let's move on to second-order thinking.
And then what?
And then what?
Thinking about consequences beyond the immediate. As Barbara McClintock said, it's about thinking further down the line.
It's the difference between eating a chocolate bar and then experiencing the sugar crash later.
Or, as Garrett Hardin put it, you can never merely do one thing.
Right, your actions have a ripple effect.
A classic example of failing to consider second-order effects is that cobra bounty in Delhi. The British government wanted to reduce the cobra population.
So they offered a reward for every dead cobra.
Right. People started bringing in dead cobras.
But then what happened?
People started breeding cobras to get the reward.
Right.
And when the program ended, there were even more cobras than before.
And we see this kind of cascading effect all the time, right?
Like, think about adding more traction to tires.
Okay.
Improves safety, right? But also means more strain on the engine, worse fuel efficiency, and more rubber particles released into the environment.
And the overuse of antibiotics.
Right. It's led to the rise of antibiotic-resistant bacteria.
Okay, so how can we use second-order thinking? Well, one thing it helps us do is prioritize the long term over the short term, like choosing healthy food for long-term health instead of junk food.
And it helps you build trust. By considering how your actions will affect others down the line, you become more reliable, more trustworthy.
Right, and it can even make your arguments more persuasive.
Right, because you've thought through the consequences.
Okay, but we have to distinguish second-order thinking from the slippery slope fallacy.
Where every action leads to disaster.
Right. As Garrett Hardin said, we need practical judgment.
Second-order thinking is about focusing on the most likely and significant effects,
So it's about looking beyond the obvious
anticipating the ripple effects,
and making decisions that will serve you well down the road.
playing the long game.
Okay, now let's talk about probabilistic thinking.
Yes, dealing with the uncertainty of the world.
Because the future is uncertain.
Right.
So probabilistic thinking helps us navigate that uncertainty.
By understanding the likelihood of different outcomes, rather than clinging to the illusion of certainty. We rarely have perfect information.
Right. Probabilistic thinking lets us prepare for a range of possible futures.
It's about acknowledging that almost nothing is 100% certain
Right.
or impossible. It all exists on a spectrum of probability.
Right.
And while our brains are pretty good at making quick judgments,
We have those heuristics.
right, we need to consciously incorporate a deeper understanding of probability to really make good decisions.
Okay, so what are the key aspects of probabilistic thinking?
Well, there's Bayesian thinking,
Okay.
which is about updating our beliefs as we get new information,
Okay.
taking what we already know, the base rate, and adjusting it based on new evidence.
So, for example,
If you see someone with a rash,
right.
your initial assessment of what caused it should be informed by how common or rare different skin conditions are.
Right.
It's an ongoing process.
Of refining our understanding.
Exactly.
So these priors, these base rates,
They're just probability estimates based on our current knowledge. They're not set in stone.
right, they can change.
Exactly.
Okay. What else?
Fat-tailed curves.
Fat-tailed curves.
Yeah. Most people are familiar with the bell curve,
Right. Normal distribution.
where extreme events are rare,
Right.
but with fat-tailed curves, those extreme events are much more likely.
Okay, give me an example.
Financial crises, wars, pandemics.
Yeah.
They're rare, but they have a huge impact.
So you're saying trying to predict those exactly is almost pointless.
It's better to focus on resilience,
Okay.
putting yourself in situations with potential for positive outcomes, even if the probability is low.
Upside optionality.
Right. And learning to fail properly,
Meaning.
never taking risks that could wipe you out completely, and developing the capacity to bounce back from setbacks.
Right.
And then the last piece is asymmetries.
Asymmetries.
Yeah, essentially, how good are our probability estimates? We tend to be overconfident, especially about positive outcomes.
Like investors who overestimate their return.
Exactly. Or underestimating negative things like traffic delays.
Right.
So recognizing those biases is key.
Espionage during wartime is a great example of probabilistic thinking. Vera Atkins, who worked with the SOE during World War II, had to make life-or-death decisions with limited information.
Choosing agents, deployment locations, all based on probabilities.
Right. And despite her skill, many agents were captured and killed.
It shows that even with the best probabilistic thinking, uncertainty remains.
Right. It helps you make better decisions, but it doesn't eliminate risk entirely.
Exactly. It's about acknowledging that uncertainty, updating your understanding as you get new information.
And being okay with saying, I don't know for sure.
But based on the evidence, this seems more likely.
Okay. Now let's talk about the difference between correlation and causation.
Because just because two things happen together doesn't mean one causes the other.
Right. Correlation just means there's a relationship.
Exactly. Like bottled water consumption and the suicide rate.
Okay.
There's very little, if any, correlation there.
Right. But temperature in Celsius and Fahrenheit.
Perfectly correlated.
Right. One directly relates to the other.
And you see weak to moderate correlations all the time, like height and weight. Taller people tend to weigh more.
Right. But it's not a perfect relationship.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And the real danger is when we assume causation from correlation.
Like if a study found a correlation between parental drinking and lower academic achievement in their children,
It might be tempting to say that drinking causes the bad grades.
but it might not be that simple, right?
There could be other factors.
Like,
Socioeconomic conditions, family stress.
or the causality could even go the other way.
The stress of the child's struggles could lead to increased drinking,
Right.
and then there's regression to the mean.
When extreme results tend to move back towards the average over time.
Like Kahneman's example of the depressed children and the energy drink, they might have improved on their own, right?
Exactly. That's why researchers use control groups to see if an intervention really works or if it's just regression to the mean.
Okay, so understanding correlation versus causation and regression to the mean are essential.
It helps us avoid jumping to conclusions.
Right. Now let's talk about inversion.
Ooh, thinking backward.
Yeah. It's approaching a problem by considering the opposite. As F. Scott Fitzgerald said, it can be difficult to appreciate just how much avoiding the standard ways of feeling dramatically increases the odds of success.
So instead of directly trying to solve it, you think about what would make things worse.
Carl Jacobi, the mathematician, said, invert, always invert.
Right. And there are two ways to do this.
Assume what you're trying to prove is true and work backward.
Or think about what to avoid.
Right.
So like Hippasus and irrational numbers, he couldn't find a ratio for the square root of 2.
So he assumed it could be expressed as a ratio,
And then he showed that assumption led to a contradiction.
proving it must be irrational.
Right. And then there's Edward Bernays and the cigarette campaign. He wanted to sell cigarettes to women.
Which was taboo at the time. So he thought, what would have to be true for women to smoke?
And he reshaped social norms, linking smoking to slimness and women's liberation.
Torches of freedom.
Right. And then John Bogle and index funds.
Instead of trying to beat the market, He focused on minimizing losses,
Lowering fees, getting rid of the risk of picking stocks.
leading to the index fund.
Okay. And this avoiding the bad approach can work on a personal level too.
Right. Like Johnny Carson's advice on how to lead a miserable life.
Right. Or Charlie Munger's additions, like being unreliable.
Or refusing to learn from mistakes.
Okay. So in problem solving, you define the problem, identify the assumptions, and state your goal.
And then you ask what would make this worse
Right.
to see what to avoid.
Florence Nightingale did this in the Crimean War. Instead of just treating the sick and wounded soldiers,
She looked at what was causing the high death rate.
and she found poor sanitation.
Right. And by improving sanitation, she saved lives,
So inversion forces us to look at things differently.
often leading to simpler solutions. Okay. Last but not least, Occam's razor and Hanlon's razor.
Simplicity and avoiding assumptions of malice.
Right. Occam's razor says that the simpler explanation is usually the better one.
The one with the fewest assumptions. Anybody can make the simple complicated, said Charles Mingus. Creativity is making the complicated simple.
And it ties into the idea that extraordinary claims require extraordinary proof. If something seems miraculous, it's more likely there's a natural explanation we don't understand yet.
Like Vera Rubin and the Andromeda Galaxy, it seemed to violate Newton's laws.
So they proposed the existence of dark matter.
Right. Something we can't see, but which affects gravity.
And it was the simplest explanation.
Simpler explanations are less likely to be wrong, right?
Statistically speaking, yes. The more assumptions, the higher the chance one is wrong.
But science is always evolving. If dark matter gets too complicated, maybe we'll need a new theory of gravity.
Right.
And simplicity can lead to efficiency, like the LA Department of Water and Power.
They used bird balls to shade a reservoir.
Right, to prevent a chemical reaction.
Much simpler than building a whole new filtration system.
Okay, now Hanlon's razor.
Never attribute to malice that which is adequately explained by stupidity.
Right. Don't assume bad intentions when it could just be a mistake.
Or incompetence.
Or lack of awareness.
It's like road rage. Someone cuts you off. It's easy to assume they're a jerk,
Right.
but maybe they just didn't see you.
And that brings us to the Linda problem. People tend to favor more complex, vivid explanations.
Even when simpler ones are more probable.
Right. So, Hanlon's razor says, think. Unintentional error.
Rather than deliberate wrongdoing.
Like when Emperor Honorius executed his general Stilicho,
Based on suspected treason.
which may have weakened the Roman Empire,
Right. It's the devil fallacy.
blaming everything bad on villains.
When it could just be stupidity.
Or circumstance